I wanted to outline an issue that I had with my 1989 Wrangler a couple days ago. First, the issue I noticed was I was idling up on a nice hill and parked, but idling, and was just looking at the sunset, and all of a sudden I just heard this nasty scraping noise. It sounded to me like the throw-up bearing went out or something in the engine. I don't know. It was a bad noise, and for about 30 seconds I was convinced that the engine had just blown up. Turned it off, turned it on, oil pressure, etc. And after 30 seconds the sound went away, and just limped it, well, not limped it home, but just drove it home and parked it. So yesterday I had the opportunity to inspect it, and I heard that the sound was coming largely from the passenger side of the engine, and I could tell it was definitely up front. So my hope was that it was something in the accessory drive and not something like a piston going out or rod bearings, camshaft, I don't know. Hoping it was external engine. And I went to the pulley and shook it a little bit, and I could feel there was definitely some play in there, which is good to find. Took it off, and I found this completely annihilated bearing. This should be sealed, I believe. So the fact that I'm even seeing this is bad. It means it's been without grease for quite a while, and obviously missing ball bearings. So this thing was smoked. Pressed it out. It's pretty easy. We'll see the new bearing in there now, but it's the same story. We'll notice on the outside, you can notice that this is the main cavity right there. This is the outside face. We'll notice on the outside there's a retaining ring in there. It was a little bit annoying to remove just with some C-clip pliers, and I ended up putting it in a vise, holding it in place using the C-clip pliers, and then just prying it out. Wasn't terrible, just needed an extra set of hands. And then we will notice right here the marks right there we're seeing is from the swaging process, which helps keep the bearing in there. So to remove the bearing, the first step was to use the C-clip pliers to remove the retaining ring. And then what I did was I got a socket. There was a 1-inch socket, and it fit perfectly right inside there. And I didn't want it big enough that it'd be hitting the metal and not really pressing it in, but I didn't want it small enough that it would be pressing from the area that might just break and make my day even worse. So in my case, I found a 1-inch socket fit perfectly in here, and then placed it in there, placed it in the vise, and just started clamping down, and the bearing came right out where I inspected it. So now I know the issue, so I was hoping that I could just replace the pulley with a pulley assembly or bearing off the shelf, and I just go on with my day. So I looked at AutoZone first, and again, we'll take note that this has grooves on it. This came off of the Jeep, the 258 powered YJ, and I found that every part interchange I could find, even for different years of the YJ with the 258, it all had this listed. A smooth pulley, which would have the back of the serpentine belt, the non-grooved side, riding up against it, which means that where this is intended to have the grooved side wrap around it, it could possibly damage it or not be effective. I don't know. Just, this ain't it. And of course, it came with a bearing inside it. There was no retaining ring. It just pressed right out. No swaging or anything. Just pressed right out. The issue with this, of course, the pulley it doesn't work. So the next step I tried looking for a replacement bearing. This sucker is 40.00 millimeters on the OD. I believe 12.6 millimeters on the ID, which is about a half an inch on the money, and 12 millimeters thick, 12.00. So that's what I was looking for. I looked through McMaster-Carr, Grainger, some other bearing supplies, and the only one I was able to find was a non-sealed bearing that basically looks like this, of course, with all the balls and a little bit of grease, which isn't what I'm looking for. I want something sealed that's going to last. This is the OEM intent, so that wasn't going to work. I didn't trust it. What I ended up deciding from there is, okay, I cannot find a bearing, so let's just pick up the pulley it recommends and measure the bearing and see if it's the same. If I can order this pulley and it has the same dimensioned bearing as this, then I can just press it out, press in here, be done. What I noticed was this bearing has a 40.0 millimeter OD, which is good. it was 12 millimeters thick, which is good, but it was 17 millimeters on the ID and came with this little bushing that fit right there. The bushing, when I got it, was 10 millimeters. So it was sized for a 10 millimeter bolt, meaning this bolt, when I had it originally, wouldn't fit in there. So aside from either downsizing or drilling out the bushing, which is what I did, drilled out the bushing, I didn't see any viable option. What I ended up deciding to do, I was looking at, oh, well, what if I just remake this? Or what if I just send this to a shop with a lathe, just open it up, maybe get a custom bearing, make my own, have a different sized shaft, or I don't know. Just looking at my options here, I decided, well, I have this bushing. It's too small, but I can open it up. Where I work, we have tons of lathes, and I could always just, slap it on a lathe with permission, and open it up to the 12.63 millimeters, or half inch. That's what the diameter of this bolt is, half inch. And do that. Though I got really bored and ultimately decided to just drill through this with a half inch bolt on my drill press. Placing this in a vise, making sure it's nice and square, and aiming to have it as concentric as possible. That's important. I placed in there, slowly drilled it up a few sizes, and pretty quickly I had this sized for a half inch bolt, which with the factory 258 powered bolt fits right on, and it's a very tight fit, so it worked well. So I took the bearing, pressed it back in here, and again noting which side had the retaining ring and which side had the swaging. There's no orientation to the bearing, and just so you can see, this, when it decides to focus, is the bearing that was in there, 6203RS. Just these replacements are everywhere. You can go on McMaster Car, you can go on tons of websites, and you'll see a 40 millimeter OD by 17 millimeter ID by 12 millimeter thickness, and those are everywhere. They're about $15, and this will work in the future. What I did was I just pressed it in, made sure that I was pressing to the swaging, so in this case bearing sitting right here, and then again used the socket, pressed it in, made sure that the socket was only touching the outer sleeve, pressed it in, put the sleeve in, or sorry, the ret ring in, and put the insert in. And now, even though the pulley doesn't seem to exist anymore, I'm able to have a brand new bearing in this thing. For anyone looking to do this on their own, they could always just order this bearing custom, or not order it custom, order it from McMaster Car, Granger, any bearing supplier really. The 40.00 millimeter by 17.00 millimeter ID by 12.00 millimeter thickness is very common and pretty cheap. The only issue is the collar, which is the hard part to find. If I had to do this again, I think what I'd do is I'd still just buy the recommended pulley, which is $30, so I'm losing $10, but then I get my insert. So if I had to do this the first time, I get my insert and I'm done. But if I ever have to do it again, I just keep the insert and then just order the generic off-the-shelf bearing and call it a day. But anyways, I hope this helped, where I just took the original or the recommended pulley that won't fit, pressed out the bearing, put the bearing in here, and then took the bushing and drilled it out to half inch, and it's worked fantastically. I hope this helps.